Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Joy podcast. I'm your host, Joy Ravella. Let's get into today's verse.
Cast your cares on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. That's from Psalm chapter 55, verse 22, the NIV version.
Today in studio, once again, we have Jen. You'll be with us all this week.
Yay!
Now, I'm really excited because later on this episode, you're going to have the floor essentially and share your story, your testimony with your IVF journey. And I just want to say there might be a lot of emotion, and this is a space where you can do that.
Thank you.
And I'm so honoured that you are going to share that story. But today's verse, Psalm chapter 55:22, cast your cares on God and he will sustain you. Jen, what are your first impressions and what does this verse tell you about who God is?
Well, this verse I've repeated to myself many times during most of the storms in my Christian life. And it just brings me so much comfort and relief. It just feels like a big protective hug from God. Like, God's coming up and he's just like, here you go, you're safe. And it really shows that God loves and he cares so much for you and I, and he wants to take it all away from you, and not just to remove him, but to walk with you and to handle it with you. Being a Christian doesn't mean that life gets easier. In fact, it actually kind of gets harder, but we have this hope and we have this faith in God that he's going to walk with us, that he's going to be there with us, that he already knows what's in front of us. So it's my best description. It's a protective hug.
I love it. It's a protective hug.
Yeah.
So Jen, I thought I would just give you the floor really to share your journey around how this verse came alive in your life.
Yeah. So this is from my most recent storm, which is why I thought it's a great time for me to share. Not many people talk about it. And so let's bring light to it.
Yeah.
So my husband and I always wanted a big family, and we love each other and been together for forever. And we knew that we have so much love to give. I was constantly praying, like, when do we start a family? And asking God, when's the right time? Am I financially ready? Or am I is my career on the right path? Am I going to be able to sustain my family? And one day God showed me a vision. I don't always get visions, so it was so special. I was like, okay, God really means it. And he showed me I was holding hands with Jesus, and Jesus looked down to my belly, and I looked down, I was like, oh, I've got a pregnant belly. And I thought, okay, yeah, let's do it. God said yes, let's go, let's move on. And I told my husband, I'm like, okay, let's do this. God said yes. When God said yes, you move on, right? But nothing happened for about a year and a half. We tried everything, and so we ended up going through the road of IVF. And IVF it's a physical pain, it's a mental pain, and it's also a financial pain. And every month I found that my hope will flutter between the fullest on one end, and then all of a sudden when things weren't working out, it will flutter to the smallest slider of hope.
And so for someone who doesn't quite understand the process of IVF, how does it work on a month-by-month basis with IVF?
So with IVF, you obviously see your doctor and they'll prescribe you with injections. And these injections would increase your hormones, so then your body will go into action and pretty much produce eggs and make them grow into follicles. I know I'm saying a lot of these.
It's a lot of jargon. Yeah. That's okay. That's fine. We're not a scientific podcast.
No, let's not go into that. So these injections I will have to inject into myself around the fat of my body, of my belly. Yeah. Yes, we have fat there. I will have to inject into it once a night at the same time, and keep going for about a week. Then I'll go into the doctors and go through ultrasounds and just checking how things are growing. And when they're at the right size, they're like, okay, let's go into this. Let's start getting these eggs out. So we'll have to go in surgery. And it will happen in 2 weeks brackets. So 2 weeks would be the practical, and then 2 weeks is of waiting. And so you can imagine my mental health was so affected, and it felt like a Russian roulette
Yeah.
Like, am I going to be pregnant or am I not? Am I going to go through this again? Am I going to go through all the pain of the injections again? Or, it's a lot of practical things, and there's a lot of mental game as well. So I felt like I was failing. Like, this went on for another year and a half. I was so sick of failing. And I just kept asking myself, why couldn't my body do what it's naturally supposed to do? I was doing everything right. I followed doctor's orders. I prayed every day. I went to church. I had family and friends praying for me. Like, we'll have praying sessions together. And I'll always end all those prayers just crying. But God wasn't answering. I didn't hear him. Maybe he was answering, but I couldn't hear him in the ways that he normally talks to me. And I kept getting the same failed results, and I just felt like my best wasn't enough. I gave everything to God. I gave everything. I gave him my worries. I told him where all the bruises were on my body. I told him my feelings of not helping my husband become the father that he always wanted to be. I just felt like I failed, and even though I casted all my IVF cares to him, I still didn't hear anything, but I continued with him. I continued praying. I continued doing IVF, but I also continued breaking. For 3 years of trying, 3 years of hope, 3 years of tears, and 3 years of believing. God did end up blessing us. Yeah. He blessed us with 4 embryos, and ended up being pregnant with my daughter. She was a twin, actually, and her twin passed away as well, so that's another story. But this is my journey. This is my story. And I know there's probably people out there right now who may not be in the same situation, just waiting, just sitting there waiting, praying. You see things happening around you, like that classmate who didn't even bother studying and they got the best exam mark ever, or like you saw that colleague who got the promotion that you actually wanted, that you really prayed for and you worked really hard for. I don't want you to turn away from God. I want you to turn to him.
Psalm chapter 55 verse 22. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. When we think about casting, sometimes we can think about it in a really delicate way. But if we look back to the fishermen in the olden days, or even today, when you see fishermen casting out their nets, it's not this delicate little wave of the hand. They are throwing all of themselves into casting out their net. They are giving all of it out. The good, the bad, the ugly, the in-between. It's just all cast into the sea. And in the same way, God invites us to cast our cares on to him. He can handle it. I love how in Jen's story, she acknowledged the pain and the hardship, the times when she couldn't hear God clearly, the times when she herself wasn't sure if this was the right path. But the one thing she did not question, the one thing she did not do, was shut herself away from God. She continued to stay with him in it, through it, and in that process, he was there to sustain her and not allow her to be shaken. Like Jen was saying, I'm not sure what your storm is right now, but if you haven't had a chat to God in a while, here's today's application. Maybe go for a long drive and just talk to him as you're driving around. I do that sometimes. Maybe for you, it's going on a walk. Maybe it involves journaling something. But today, choose to stay engaged. Choose to cast your cares, because he will sustain you. That's Psalm chapter 55, verse 22. Well, that wraps up today's episode of the Everyday Joy podcast. If this one really resonated with you, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the first episode of this podcast that's all about gaining a fresh God perspective. Or perhaps you'll enjoy episode 15 with my guest Jackie, where she talked about having a soft heart when situations are tough. I can't wait to catch up tomorrow, and if you haven't already, would you leave a 5-star review? It really does help us spread the word. Catch up tomorrow.